The purpose of this video is how to deal with a multi-tenant environment that has addresses that overlap, which means you have to NAT from one tenant into your tetration environment or NAT from another tenant into your tetration environment. So we're going to go through the basic process of creating a tenant, setting up the users, the roles, and then finally configuring the NAT portion. So we start off by creating our tenants. In this case, I'm going to create a tenant called pod09. And I simply click create. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm now under pod09, the appropriate scope. I'm going to switch over to roles, and I'm going to create a tenant admin role. I'm just going to call this guy tadmin. And this will be just for pod 9. And we'll give him ownership capabilities. Okay. So I go ahead, now I create the user. When I create the user, all right, I'm still under pod 9. I'm going to click create user, and I'll create a user here called it'll be pod09. Whoops. Pod09. It's going to create the user, right? And I'm going to specify the role tadmin that we created. And now we can create the user. All right, so I click create, and I've now created that user. So that's a pod specific user. All right, and we'll log in as that person in just a moment. The next place I go is under my agents. And I want to be specific. See down here, I want to go ahead under the agent remote VRF configurations. Click create config. I'm going to call this one for pod09. And then I'm going to specify, this is going to be the external address that that tenant is natted to. So anything received by tetration that has the IP address, the natted IP address of this case .209 is going to be associated specifically with pod 9. So I create that tenant, and now you can see depending on the external IP address that they're natted to, I'm going to have some different addresses and different tenants that they're going to map into. Last thing we need to do is remember the password. We don't set the password. You have to do password recovery. And so we're going to do pod09 at tetration.training. And that's going to send us a password recovery email. When I receive that email and click on the link, this is where I set what I want the new password to be. And so I'm going to go ahead and set this. Now I log into that environment. Not very exciting right now, but what I want to point out is, notice when I go under scopes, all right, the only scope that's going to be there is pod 9 because it's for that particular tenant. And as agents register, only agents that are natted to that .209 address are going to be associated with pod 9. So this is a basic setup with we're creating our tenants, our users, our roles, and then we're using our VRF agent config to identify the natted external address for a particular tenant. Thank you.